Perfect.
We are now recording.
We are just about to get started. I want to actually hand the mic over to Bahia to talk about our keynote. Bahia.
So I'm very excited that we have Ryan Armstrong here today, and I'm not going to officially announce him. I will pass that off to Shanti Shoji of Sasakawa. But I do want to just mention that I had the pleasure of meeting Ryan right before the pandemic hit, when Aflac hosted a USJETAA reception when we were visiting Tokyo. And it was great to meet Ryan then, and your generosity of allowing a bunch of JET alumni to come to the Aflac offices and mingle was fantastic. So I'm so glad you could be here today. Now I'd like to turn it over to Shanti Shoji from Sasakawa Peace Foundation USA. Shanti is, as we mentioned earlier, the Sasakawa Peace Foundation USA is supporting this keynote. So I'd like to give Shanti the opportunity to formally introduce our speaker.
Thank you so much, Bahia, and good evening, everyone. As Bahia said, my name is Shanti Shoji, Director of Programs at Sasakawa Peace Foundation USA. Perhaps you haven't heard of us. We're a nonpartisan 501c3 organization based here in Washington, D.C., and we're dedicated to strengthening the relationship and understanding between the U.S. and Japan for the benefit of a free and open international community. We're really honored to be able to provide support to Pacific Northwest JETAA and USJETAA for tonight's keynote presentation from Mr. Ryan Armstrong, Vice President at Aflac Life Insurance Japan Limited. Ryan's trajectory from the JET program to his current position at Aflac Japan is truly impressive and is a fantastic example of how your participation in the JET program can serve as a launch pad for pursuing a professional career in Japan. Ryan began his JET experience as an ALT in Kagawa Prefecture in 1998 and later transitioned to a position as a coordinator for international relations. Between 2003 and 2011, he held roles with the American Chamber of Commerce in Japan, as well as the Japan-American Institute of Management Science, before eventually joining Aflac Life Insurance Japan as Deputy Director of Government Affairs. Over the past 10 years, he has held a number of management positions within the company, accruing valuable leadership experience and intercultural awareness from working for an American business in Tokyo. What's equally impressive to Ryan's professional history is his enthusiasm to understand Japan on a deeply personal level. As a former Kagawa JET myself, I was amazed to learn that Ryan is one of the few people to have taken part in the 1,200-kilometer 88-temple pilgrimage on Shikoku Island, not once, but twice. This pilgrimage may actually have some parallels to Ryan's journey up the corporate ladder in Japan, both which required perseverance, a sense of purpose, and a willingness to give and receive support from people he encountered along the way. On that note, I'm honored to turn the floor over to Ryan so that you can share your insights with us. Thank you so much, Ryan.
Well, Shanti, thanks. That was a fantastic introduction. I'm really honored, and I'm especially thrilled that you're a former Kagawa JET. And I never thought that the Shikoku pilgrimage would come up in this discussion, but indeed that was quite a life-changing experience for me. And clearly, Japan is really a place where you can really develop yourself and discover yourself and learn more about your country. So. I really appreciate the opportunity to be with all of you today. I appreciate the Sasakawa Peace Foundation in sponsoring this event, Claire, USJETAA, and then the Pacific Northwest JETAA. Really, it seems like just yesterday I was in the audience listening to these types of speaking events, and to be here in front of you is really an honor. So if we can pull up the slide, can you all see slides?
Yeah, I'm going to share them right now. All right, can you see it now?
Looks good.
Great.
Why don't you go ahead and go to the next slide if you could. And it seems like the screen is maybe it's my screen. There we go. Can you shrink it a little bit to get the slide to fit on the screen? So.
I don't know how, hold on, let me try something else.
I think it's for each view.
So it might just be Ryan's not seeing it.
Yeah, it might be.
Okay.
Are you seeing it right, Jessica?
Yeah.
Okay, good. If you
Oh.
guys are seeing it right, that's good. All right. Let me do this full screen. All right. So today, there's really three things I thought about I'd like to cover with you all today. First, I'd like to talk about the Japan opportunity. And specifically, I'd like to use my company, Aflac, as an example of possibility. And then I'd like to share with you a little bit about my own professional experience after JET. And then lastly, I'd like to leave you with some thoughts about finding a job and working in Japan. So if you can go ahead and go to the next slide, please. All right. Well, for those of you from the United States, you might be familiar with Aflac. But what you may not know about Aflac is that we're actually in two countries. We're in the United States and we're in Japan. Another thing you may not know about Aflac is that 75% of our global revenue comes from Japan. So 75% Japan, 25% United States. So our management is keenly focused on what's happening in Japan. Given that we're in these two countries, we are deeply committed to the US-Japan relationship. And it's really why I'm so happy to be here with you today. So let me talk about possibility. If you go to the next slide. Thanks. Aflac had really humble beginnings. We were founded in 1955 by three brothers in Columbus, Georgia. Now, the company had just a handful of employees, and Columbus, Georgia was chosen because it was the biggest city in the southern United States that didn't already have an insurance company. Next slide, please. So in 1970, Aflac's founder, John Amos, actually traveled to Osaka, and he went and visited the World's Fair. While he was in Osaka, he was really impressed by all the Japanese people he saw wearing masks. And he thought, wow, these people are really health conscious. What a great place to sell insurance. So he went back to Georgia. Next slide, please. He went back to Georgia, got to work with his brothers, and tried to figure out a way to enter the Japan market. Now, they had a really difficult time trying to get licensed, and they actually had thoughts of quitting. But they were able to find some Japanese partners, and after 4 years of painstaking work, they were finally licensed to sell insurance in Japan. When Aflac entered the Japan market, they began by selling cancer insurance. And today, Aflac has pioneered what's known in Japan now as the third sector of the insurance market. Now, in the early days, Aflac had enormous challenges. One reason was because talking about cancer was taboo. And it was often the case where doctors would refrain from telling patients that they had cancer. So what Aflac had to do is we had to figure out a way to be able to pay people claims without letting them know they have cancer. That's a big challenge, but the company was able to work through it. And fortunately, times have changed. Those practices are no longer necessary, but 48 years later, go ahead and go to the next slide, please. Today, Aflac is the leading company for cancer and medical insurance in Japan. We have over 24 million policies in force. We insure more than 1 in 5 families, and we sell insurance through a nationwide network of agencies, banks, post offices. So our products are really delivered to every corner of Japan and every mountaintop. We have a total of 1.75 trillion yen in annual total revenue. Now that's a big number. It might not sound like a lot, but in dollar terms, that's over $12 billion each year. We pay 10,000 claims a day, and we do so with a 99.998% accuracy. Now, I don't know about you, but I would love to have had that kind of results when I was in school. Alas, I didn't. So if you could go to the next slide, please. Great. But, Aflac didn't get this way overnight. In fact, it adapted to the business environment and it evolved over time. So if you can go to the next slide. Now, let me give you an example. The Aflac duck. If you're from the United States, you're familiar with the duck. In the US, he's aggressive, he's sassy, he breakdances, shoots spitballs, he gets injured every once in a while. Yeah, he's really charismatic. Next slide, please. But in Japan, and next slide, the duck is congenial. It's soft, it's welcoming, it has a sing-song voice. In fact, when the company first rolled out the duck in Japan, it used the US duck. And what we found is that it didn't resonate with the Japanese public. So the company changed the way the duck behaved and sounded to make it more fitting for the Japanese market. So in this slide, you can see the Aflac duck dressed as the maneki neko, or the welcoming cat. You may have seen it in stores. We call it the maneki neko duck. We also have on the screen the maneki neko duck roboto, the robot. So again, it's really, they've really done a remarkable job with tailoring this character to the Japanese market. Now, let me give you one more example. This is a US duck. Now there's gonna be some noise, so please maybe pull your headphones away from your ears because it might be loud. Just listen to the voice. That's the US duck. Japan duck. Okay, listen. Can you hear a difference? So they have really modified this character to fit the market. Next slide, please. So, since its founding in Japan in 1974, Aflac has really leveraged its strengths. It's adapted to the environment and it's become a huge success. And I think you can too. I'd like to shift gears now and talk a little bit about the Japanese economy. So if you go to the next slide. So for those of you who lived in Japan or are following Japan, you're very familiar with Japan's economic challenges and what's been called the lost decades. But I think it's important to take a step back and remind ourselves that Japan is actually the world's third largest economy after only the United States and China. So there's enormous opportunities here. Next slide, please. However, Japan is facing some demographic challenges. So you may be all familiar that there's been a shift. The population is aging. People are having fewer children. And so that creates a headwind for companies. So what companies are looking, they're saying, hey, whoa, our market is shrinking and it's getting smaller over time. So we have to do something about this. So if you can go to the next slide. So companies aren't standing still with the shrinking market. What they're doing is they're looking overseas for growth opportunities. So if you look at the number of M&A that are taking place by Japanese companies abroad, you'll see there's an increasing trend over time. Of course, this was impacted by the pandemic somewhat, but I think the trend will continue once travel restrictions are lifted. But the idea remains the same. Japanese companies need growth opportunities. Overseas is where they can get it. So if you can go to the next slide. And as those of you who have worked in Japan know, and those of you who are going to work in Japan will find out, Japan still is challenged with English language proficiency. And actually, Japan ranks relatively low compared to other countries. According to an EF English Proficiency Index, in 2021, Japan ranks 78th out of 112 countries in terms of language proficiency. So if you can go to the next slide. So, and therein lies the opportunity for all of you. With Japanese companies looking abroad for growth, but finding scarcity in the fact that they can't get talent who can communicate effectively in English. Those of you who can understand Japan can make a big contribution in helping Japanese companies succeed in the global arena. So with that, I'd like to go to the next slide, please. So set a course and go with the flow. I did have the opportunity to hear the panel discussion before, and I think I was actually quite pleased to hear that what I'm going to say is going to track very closely to what they said. So if you can go to the next slide, please. So careers. You know, when I reflect on my own career, it wasn't a straight line. It twisted and it turned. And although I didn't know it at the time, when I think back, I can see three key phases. The first phase was developing my skills, namely my Japanese, and getting credentials. I went to graduate school, got an MBA. The second phase was broadening my perspective and building a network, and building a real meaningful network, not business cards and not LinkedIn connections, but working closely together with people. And then the third phase, where I am now, is ultimately about increasing responsibility. It's about deepening my professional knowledge, and it's about leadership in a cross-cultural bilingual environment. So if you can go to the next slide. Thank you. Now, my career, as I've said before, has taken a lot of turns, but I've always remained focused on US-Japan relations. So I began my career in the JET program, and that enabled me to get functional Japanese, and it exposed me to a different way of doing things. During the JET, I did a type change. So I did an ALT job for 1 year, and then shifted to the CIR, which I did for 2 years. And after JET, I wanted something to somehow credential my international experience. So I went and got a Japan-focused MBA. Now, during my MBA, I had an opportunity to do an internship. And I did that with the American Chamber of Commerce in Japan, or ACCJ. And when I think back about my career, that internship was really the opportunity I needed to launch my career. Now on this slide, you'll see 5 red boxes. Now, each one of those boxes represents a major change that I've had in my career. Now, I won't go through the details here, but I will say that in addition to JET, I've worked for a Japanese marketing company. I've done government and external affairs for an industry association. I've run international business programs for a management training institute. And all of these things served as the foundation to help me be successful in my current role with Aflac, which has really grown and expanded over time. So today I'm in charge of Aflac Japan's corporate secretariat department. Now, among the things that it does is it manages the Aflac Japan board of directors, or administrators, I should say. We are in charge of the company's corporate policies and regulations. We run internal controls, and we implement organization changes. I'm also in charge of Aflac Japan's investor relations function. So we work closely with Aflac Incorporated to ensure that we're delivering the right messages at the right time to the investment community. Our ESG initiatives also fall under investor relations. In addition to that, I also oversee Aflac Japan's crisis management function, which, thanks to the pandemic, has been particularly active over the past 2 years. So it's really hard to believe, but everything in my career has given me the foundation and equipped me to do the role that I'm currently doing now. So if you'll go to the next slide. Thanks. Now, my reason for telling you all of this is to encourage you to be patient with your career. All right, it's going to have twists, but if you can come up with a central theme, if you can come up with a vision, for example, mine has always been US-Japan relations, you'll go really far. So as you build your careers, I encourage you to set a course and be flexible. Again, we heard this in the previous panel. And if you have that overarching theme, each step along the way is going to open up new doors and opportunities for you. So let's go to the next page. All right, finding a job in Japan. I'll go through this quickly. I know you've covered it in previous sessions. If you can go to the next page. Okay, Finding a job, first of all, finding a job, any job, whether it's in the US or Japan, is hard. It's tough. And again, we heard this in the previous session, but, and I echo this, I believe that luck is where preparation meets opportunity. So use every resource at your disposal to search for opportunities. Engage with potential employers. Prepare yourself, because it's where these three things come together is where you're going to find a job that's right to you. And ultimately, I would like to say too that finding a job is actually less about you, and it's more about being in the right place at the right time. Now, I've hired a lot of people during my career, and unfortunately, I've passed over more people. So please know that if you don't get a job, it's nothing personal. It's not a reflection of you. Again, it's about being at the right place at the right time. So as you embark on your career, have confidence, keep your head up, stay focused on your vision. Next slide, please. Thank you. As you begin your search for jobs in Japan, I want to bring a few things to your attention. First, in Japan, employee turnover is relatively low. So good jobs can be hard to come by. Many Japanese companies still conduct formal annual hiring processes. So most likely your hiring is going to be unique. And oftentimes that can be a challenge. Another thing to note is that although lifetime employment is waning in Japan, elements of it still remain. So if you're hired by a company, they're going to commit to you, but at the same time, they're going to expect your commitment as well. And lastly, one point to flag is that in Japan, there's really strict human resource regulations. And so companies find it very difficult to let people go. And so what that means for us, for those of you who are looking to get hired, is that companies are really careful with bringing people on board, because there's a risk with, if you happen to hire the wrong person, what do you do? So they're going to be cautious during the hiring process. Go to the next, please. Thank you. Next slide. So when you're preparing yourself for a job in Japan, it's important that, again, you have your vision and that you're able to effectively communicate that vision. If you don't have one, make it up and practice it. If you do want to work in Japan, I encourage you to work on your Japanese. The better your language skills, the more effective you'll be and the higher you'll go. If you lack experience, which certainly everyone does at some point in time, get credentials, go back to school. Degrees and certificates can help you stand out, and they can complement your JET experience. If you have an opportunity to do an internship, do it. The best professional network that you can make is one developed by working with others. Again, as I said earlier, in my own experience, the internship really helped me land my first job out of the JET program. And it really was instrumental in helping me be where I am today. And lastly, as you prepare yourself, create a compelling resume. Use active language and concrete examples. And tailor your resume to each opportunity. Next slide, please. So as you search for jobs in Japan, there's an enormous amount of resources at your disposal. The challenge is going to be trying to whittle it down. So I recommend tapping into your network. Doing so is going to help you identify positions that are going to be a better fit for your skills and interests. And it'll increase the likelihood that you can get a personal introduction. Alumni groups, industry associations are great places to contact. There's online resources, which I think you've heard about today, DaiJob, Gaijin Pot, Career Cross. These can all help you explore what's out there. And of course, company websites and recruiters are great sources of information. Ultimately, however, in my experience, the most effective way to find and secure a job in Japan is through a personal introduction. So given the employer caution that I noted earlier, getting that introduction can go a long way in helping you get beyond that first interview. So if you can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. Engaging employers. Remember that employers don't only want skills, they want someone who's reliable. So as an employer myself, I want someone who I can trust to do what they say they're going to do. But unfortunately, when you're in an interview, that's a really difficult thing to try to assess, especially if you've only got an hour. That's why the introduction is so important. Now, again, during your interview, be prepared to communicate your vision and help the employer understand that you have a desire to learn and grow. During the process, do things right and pay attention to details. You know, Japan is a very formal place, so show up on time. In fact, don't just show up on time, show up early. Proofread everything and send thank you notes to make your case again. Again, searching for a job is hard. If you can be in Japan, that's going to make it easier. Most importantly, though, as you begin your career, just get your foot in the door. Because if the job is consistent with your vision over time, it's going to be worth it. So get your foot in the door. Next slide, please. And lastly, on the job, you know, and here again, I'm speaking as an employer. I'm too busy to have to tell someone to do things each step of the way. So I need people who are going to be proactive and who are going to take initiative. I also need people who are going to take responsibility and follow through. So if I can ask a person with confidence and know that they're going to help me get the job done, I'm going to ask them to help me some more and help me more. And that's going to build trust and confidence over time. So as you work, be hungry, but be humble. So take on every assignment, no matter how menial, and I do this today, take those assignments as an opportunity to show your stuff. Now, the mindset that I always adopted was, hey, boss, you know, I've got a graduate degree and all this experience, but if you want me to make copies, I will make the best copies you have ever seen. And so that's the attitude that I've taken to my jobs. And again, over time, it helps me develop a connection and they come to trust you. And so they can give you more, they can give you more challenging assignments. And that's how your career is going to expand over time. And lastly, I would say, never, ever, ever burn bridges. All right. Working, you've heard this before, working in Japan, connections are really important. And you never know when you might need an introduction. So treat each relationship sincerely and treat it as an important investment in the future. So if you can go to the next slide. So I know I've covered a really huge amount of ground in a short amount of time. So I'm just going to end with a few key points. First of all, aim high. Who knows, you know, the idea that you have right now might just be the next Aflac Japan. Next, as Japan is the world's third largest economy, it has a lot to offer. So whether you're on a trip to a fair or you're marveling at people wearing masks, keep your eyes open, look for inspiration, and jump on opportunity. And third, remember, your career is a marathon, not a sprint. So take the long-term view. Give yourself an overarching theme or a vision, and don't be alarmed by a turn in the road, and go with the flow. If your theme is solid, new doors will open. And finally, be hungry. Seek out responsibility and follow through, but be humble too, and take every assignment as an opportunity to show your stuff, to learn and to grow. That's how you build trust. So as a longtime student of Japan and as a representative from a company that is deeply, deeply committed to the US-Japan relationship, you know, I'm thrilled by your interest in Japan, and I applaud you for being here today. I really wish all of you the best of luck, and I look forward to discussing with you in the next session. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Ryan. That was fantastic and such great advice. I think that advice is also extremely good outside of Japan too. I mean, so much of what you said really, really resonated with me. I'm so glad you were able to share that advice with us. So we have about 15 minutes to take questions. I saw a few chats coming in, but I don't see any specific questions. So if anyone does have questions, please put them in the chat. I've also changed the settings so that if you would like to use the raise hand function and ask your question out loud, we can do it that way as well. So Ryan, I guess while we're waiting to see if anyone else has any questions, I wanted to ask you, I'm trying to think of a good question to ask you because you covered so much. Like,
yeah, it was a lot to cover. I'm sorry about that.
You covered everything I think I possibly could ask. But I wonder if, let's see, if you could tell us a little more about this idea of kind of going with the flow, and when do you know when you should be taking a turn or staying the course?
That's a good question. When do you know you should take a turn? I think, the day you get bored or you think something is too easy or routine is probably the day that you need to start start thinking about your next step. I'm a firm believer in expanding your comfort zones. And so I'm always looking to be, think of there being a bubble around yourself. And you always want to be right on the cusp of that bubble so that you're always pushing yourself to do a little bit more. Now, what happens by doing that is over time, that bubble, that circle gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And certainly that's been something that's been fundamental to my career. So I think, and I'm, if something becomes routine for me, I'm like, okay, I gotta do something else. I need more. I need to do something else. And so I'll start or start looking around. And so I encourage all of you to do the same.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm going to take one question from the chat and then we'll go to Shanti. Could you tell us a little bit about the master's program that you did? Was it in Japan? Was it a bilingual program? Tell us a little more about it.
Sure. So I did, actually the University of Hawaii, now I don't know that they have this program anymore, had a Japan-focused MBA program. They had a China-focused MBA program, and it was an accelerated program. So it was a 18-month program. And so basically what it entailed was we went to the University of Hawaii, and they had a joint relationship with the Japan America Institute of Management Science. And so we studied Japanese for, I want to say it was, 2 to 3 hours a day. And we studied Japanese management practices. So we studied, marketing and finance and economics and, all of the things, managerial accounting. We studied all of those things. And again, the underlying theme was Japanese management and Japanese business style. So for me, I'd invested in the JET, and I had worked as a CIR, and I worked on my language. And so I didn't want that to go to waste. So I thought, okay, if I can go and get a Japan-focused MBA, that can really complement the experience that I already had. And again, what I wanted to do was be a bridge between US companies and Japanese companies. And so that was an effective way, in a short amount of, it was an 18-month program. And actually part of it was an internship. And again, that was huge, because that actually got your foot in the door, got you working with the company, got you experiencing what it's like to actually have to implement projects in a multicultural environment. So that program was really instrumental for my career.
Great. Thank you so much, Ryan. I'd like to go to Shanti if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Sure, thank you. I was curious, if we're foreigners wanting to work in Japan, and obviously this depends on the company or where you want to work, but you know, as someone who's working in Japan and has been there a long time, what do you think it is that we as non-Japanese can really bring? Is it more that they're looking for someone who speaks, you know, English and they would like that? Or is it having connections outside of Japan that maybe they don't have because you've worked in your field or whatnot in the US? I'm wondering if there's any tips that you feel kind of Japanese businesses are looking at specifically.
I think the different perspective, and I think, you know, what they want, you know, Japan's changing, and people know Japan is changing, and people know that Japan needs to change. They know that diversity is important, and that's really exploding here right now. Now, Japan is a very homogenous society. It's 99.99% Japanese. Maybe it's a little bit less than that, but it's pretty homogenous. And so right now, when in Japan, when you talk about diversity, inevitably it's focused on gender diversity. But I think once they take it another step forward, it's going to be, you know, national diversity, it's going to be ethnic diversity, it's going to be, you know, all sorts of other diversities can come into play here. And so I think what we can do as non-Japanese is we can go in and, you know, when I said be humble, Americans tend to be more aggressive. But if we can take a step back and really try to understand what is Japan looking for, what are they trying to get at, and then communicate these new ideas or this different perspective in a humble and respectful way, I think that's what people need. And so I think that's what you all can bring, is this new perspective. And we also tend to not be so shy. You know, we'll share our opinions and we'll say, hey, what about this? You know, just throwing it out there. And that's something that is not as common here in Japan. So I would implore you all to do that, but do it in a respectful and a polite way.
Thank you so much, Ryan. We have 5 minutes left. I want to take 2 of the questions from the chat. I don't think we're going to get through all of them. But Isabel asks, how has networking in Japan adjusted to the pandemic? In the States, it seems that Zoom webinars and events like this one have become a really popular alternative. Is this the case in Japan?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. I mean, you know, frankly, the pandemic has been, you know, it's been a game changer. The whole world is different because of this pandemic. And that poses some challenges, especially for, you know, people who are just beginning their careers or who are joining a company for the first time. You know, I'll be frank with you, it's a challenge, because how do you connect with people in a remote environment? You know, because everything is remote now. All the meetings are taking place via your computer. And so, you know, in that environment, how do you connect with people? And, you know, unfortunately, there's no simple answer to that. I think it's being proactive. You know, it's okay to give someone a call and say, hey, I got a question, or, you know, I think we have to be even more aggressive and proactive in how we're engaging with people, especially when you're new. I would say, for those of you who are in the United States, I would say that, you know, Japan has done really well in the pandemic. And by really, really well, what I mean is that we've been able to keep the total case count down. People aren't getting as sick, and you know, the total number of deaths has been very low. What that's enabled us to do is bring people back to the office. So in Aflac Japan, about 50% of our employees are at the office at any one time. So I think in Japan, we've been able to maintain some of those human connections, which have been challenged in other areas. So that's a great question.
Thank you so much, Ryan. All right, this is our final question, all we have time for. But the question is, I noticed your course was a theme. Many other places and people focus on a job instead. How did you decide or realize that your course was more theme-based versus job-specific?
I think that comes with time. Certainly when I was just starting, it was like, I gotta get this job. But then as you have more jobs under your belt and you have more years of experience and more gray hair, then, you can start looking at things thematically. In retrospect, had someone told me earlier in my career, hey, come up with a theme, I think part of it was just was luck. I mean, I really was fortunate in that I remember in high school, I had the opportunity to study Japanese in high school. And I remember at the time, someone asked me, I was on an airplane, and someone said, hey, what do you want to do? I had no idea what I want to do. So I just made something like, well, I'm studying Japanese. I want to be a bridge between the United States, Japanese companies and US companies. And I just kind of plopped out of my mouth. But then, over time, I found that I kept coming back to this theme. So certainly at the beginning of my career, I didn't have that strong of a conviction. I couldn't see it as clearly as I do now. So, my encouragement to you all is, sit down. What is that vision? What is that common theme? If you can identify it now and you can start telling people about it, that's going to make it easier for them to help you. And that's going to make it easier for them to give you an introduction. And that's going to make it easier for you to get a job. So, keep at it. You can do it. It's tough. It's always going to be tough. But, I'm really excited for all of you because there's a lot of opportunity out there.
Well, thank you so much, Ryan, for your keynote, being with us today, answering all these questions. We really appreciate it. And just thank you so much. Now I'm going to turn it back over to Jessica to close us out and explain how the optional breakouts are going to work at the end. Thank you, Ryan.
Great. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you to all of our panelists and speakers today. We are coming to an end, and I just want to remind everyone that there will be an optional opportunity to submit your resume for some circulation through some different companies, especially working with Great Lakes. That will be, more information will be explained in an email. Expect that sometime next week, as well as recordings for today's session. So if you missed some things in the morning, or maybe you're watching this now, it will make it available to you. So one last time, I want to thank Claire and Sasakawa. I want to thank USJETAA and my own alumni association, Pacific Northwest JETAA Alumni Association, and Great Lakes for coming together to make these kinds of events happen and to support not only the JET Alumni Association, but current JETs and hopefully some of you prospective JETs as well. So without further ado, let me explain what these breakouts will be. So we are going to have